This despicable human being. He's stupid as well as being ill-tempered. You know, those aren't my words because I would never call Donald Trump ill-tempered. This is how the Republican leader of the United States Senate in 2020, Mitch McConnell, described Donald Trump in an oral history after Donald Trump lost the 2020 presidential election. In late December of 2020, Mitch McConnell said, "He's stupid," as if it was a known fact, like planet Earth is round, something beyond dispute. This despicable human being. Stupid does not equal despicable. Sometimes Donald Trump can just be stupid, like when he's talking about tariffs. But when Donald Trump manifests, in Mitch McConnell's words, as this despicable human being, his stupidity is the least
Happy to have you
of
here.
what is so despicable about him. And so this weekend, this despicable human being became the first president of the United States to say, "I'm glad," when a good and faithful servant died. Robert Mueller was everything Donald Trump could never be: smart, highly educated, wise, and faithful. Faithful to his one and only wife, faithful to his two daughters, faithful to all of the oaths he took as a United States Marine, a federal prosecutor, FBI director, and faithful to his country. Donald Trump's deep and irreversible perversion blinds him to human decency. He does not know what it is. He does not know how to imitate it. And so because Robert Mueller served as the first special prosecutor to investigate Donald Trump in his first term as president, and because Robert Mueller successfully proved that Vladimir Putin and the Russian government did indeed interfere in the 2016 presidential election to harm Hillary Clinton and help Donald Trump, and because Robert Mueller sent Donald Trump's campaign manager to prison and mounted other successful prosecutions against Donald Trump's associates, when Robert Mueller died on Friday at age 81, Donald Trump said, "Good, I'm glad." Donald Trump is far less educated than the average high school American history student, not to mention the AP history students. And so Donald Trump has no idea that no president before him had ever said anything like that. Donald Trump doesn't know that Richard Nixon said nothing when Leon Jaworski died. Leon Jaworski was the special Watergate prosecutor who helped drive the investigation of Republican President Richard Nixon to the point that Richard Nixon was forced to resign the presidency and accept a pardon from his vice president, Gerald Ford, when Gerald Ford took the oath of office as president, so that Richard Nixon could not be prosecuted by Leon Jaworski after resigning the presidency. Leon Jaworski led a prosecution team that convicted 48 members of Richard Nixon's administration, most of whom were put in prison, including Richard Nixon's White House chief of staff and his White House counsel and his attorney general. Leon Jaworski completely destroyed Richard Nixon's life. And when Leon Jaworski died, Richard Nixon did not issue a public statement saying, "Good, I'm glad," because Richard Nixon, who was correctly judged to be a despicable human being eventually by most Americans, at least knew what basic human decency looks like. And Richard Nixon knew that he should have nothing to say publicly about the death of Leon Jaworski. Donald Trump was in his 20s when Leon Jaworski was the most famous prosecutor in the world going after the President of the United States, and Donald Trump was in his 30s when Leon Jaworski died in 1982. Donald Trump was there for all of that. But because Donald Trump is not educable, he learned nothing from Richard Nixon's reaction to the death of his special prosecutor, the special prosecutor who completely destroyed Richard Nixon's life. And so historians have yet another marker to prove which of these two human beings was worse, Richard Nixon or Donald Trump. Aside from judging them as presidents, historians will have no difficulty judging which one was the more despicable human being. Donald Trump's Vice President, James David Vance, ducked the death of Robert Mueller on social media and said nothing. It was the Vice President who said that anyone who would say a negative word about Charlie Kirk after he was killed had to be, quote, a disgusting person and deserved to be fired from their jobs in private enterprise and in government. If that formulation applies, then it certainly should apply to any disgusting person who supports what Donald Trump said about Robert Mueller. The most incompetent and lying Secretary of Treasury in history, who seems to believe he is good on Sunday morning television, such that he continues to go on to humiliate and debase himself every Sunday, demonstrated his rank ignorance yesterday when asked about Donald Trump's despicable statement about Robert Mueller.
I think it's appropriate for the President of the United States to celebrate the death of an American citizen, someone who's a Bronze Star, Purple Heart recipient and who served in Vietnam?
Kristen, I was with the President in the green room at Davos, and there was a video playing of what may have been an illegal raid on his home at Mar-a-Lago. They are going through his wife's wardrobe, and I watched the look in his eye, and I think that neither one of us can understand what has been done to the president and to his family.
What a raving fool. What a clown. Couple of things. First of all, what was done to Richard Nixon by special prosecutors was much, much worse than what happened to Donald Trump. And Robert Mueller closed his investigation of Donald Trump 3 years before the FBI's totally legal raid of Donald Trump's residence to retrieve classified material for which Donald Trump was charged with federal crimes by a different special prosecutor, who the oblivious Scott Bessent, the lying Scott Bessent, doesn't seem to know is named Jack Smith. While he was at it, the Treasury Secretary humiliated himself as a military strategist, saying, quote, sometimes you have to escalate to de-escalate. Needless to say, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Unlike Robert Mueller, Scott Bessent never dreamed of serving in any capacity in the military, and in fact, legally would not have been allowed to serve in the military when Scott Bessent was of enlistment age, because Scott Bessent is a gay man, married to a gay man who has 2 children. And during Scott Bessent's years of military enlistment eligibility, it was completely against the law to be gay in the United States military. Scott Bessent was an outlaw in the eyes of the American military in those days. And so he never faced the kinds of moments Robert Mueller faced in Vietnam when, as his Bronze Star commendation says, Robert Mueller personally led a fire team across the fire-swept area terrain to recover a mortally wounded Marine. Scott Bessent has absolutely no idea what it feels like to decide to risk your life to save someone else's life. Most of us have lived safe enough lives to have no idea what that moment is like. Lindsey Graham has no idea. Lindsey Graham went from calling Donald Trump, quote, a jackass when he was running against Donald Trump for president in 2016, to playing Donald Trump's jackass on TV, as he did in utterly despicable style yesterday. Senator Lindsey Graham served in the Air Force as a lawyer, far from any combat. And yesterday, before Donald Trump announced his panicked retreat in Iran this morning, Lindsey Graham urged Donald Trump, who avoided military service during the war that Robert Mueller served in, to send in the Marines to seize Karg Island and run it.
We got 2 Marine expeditionary units sailing to this island. We did Iwo Jima. We can do this.
We? The United States Marines fought the Battle of Iwo Jima 10 years before Lindsey Graham was born in the last year of World War II. The United States military suffered 7,000 deaths in the Battle of Iwo Jima, 7,000 killed in action in that one battle in the last year of World War II, 10 years before Lindsey Graham was born. That is more killed in action than the entire Afghanistan and Iraq wars combined. We did Iwo Jima, says the cowardly Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham was rightly attacked for that statement, including by Republican members of the House of Representatives who are brave enough to attack the rantings of Lindsey Graham, but not Donald Trump. Lindsey Graham has never had a spouse. He's never had a child. Lindsey Graham can never know what it feels like for the parents of service members killed in action to get that knock on the door, that ring of the doorbell, with two military personnel standing at their doorstep ready to tell them the worst thing they're ever going to hear in their lives. Lindsey Graham has no idea. Donald Trump has no idea. But Donald Trump knows the political pain of a crashing stock market. As soon as he felt that pain with his illegal and unconstitutional tariffs last year, he immediately announced a suspension of those tariffs, and the stock market immediately recovered. With the stock market poised for a crash before the opening bell this morning, Donald Trump said that the United States was in some kind of settlement negotiation with Iran. And when the stock market opened, it immediately shot upward, not because anyone trading in the stock market actually believes Donald Trump. There is absolutely no proof that the United States is in any kind of negotiation with Iran, and Iranian officials have denied that they are in any kind of negotiation at all with Donald Trump. But Donald Trump simply claiming that there are negotiations is all the stock market needs, because the stock market knows in the end Donald Trump will lie his way out of his war, just like he lied his way into it. Donald Trump told the lie that Iran was an imminent threat to the United States 2 weeks away from hitting the United States with a nuclear weapon. That was Donald Trump's entry lie for his war. And everyone on Wall Street knows Donald Trump is going to lie his way out of it by claiming at some point that he has won everything he wanted to win in his war in Iran, with negotiations or without negotiations. Donald Trump will not achieve any kind of peace deal with Iran that is better than the nuclear deal negotiated by Vietnam combat veteran and President Obama's Secretary of State John Kerry, who was a high school hockey teammate of Robert Mueller's. And so Donald Trump enters the fourth week of his war, the most expensive war in the history of the world, as lost as he was in the first week. And when asked today who would control the crucial Strait of Hormuz shipping lanes in his imagined negotiation with Iran, Donald Trump actually said, me. Me and the Ayatollah. Quote, me and the Ayatollah. And with that, no stupider thing has ever been said about the outcome of a war by a president of the United States. Donald Trump knows that Wall Street has a phrase for his retreats on tariffs and now on war. Wall Street calls it taco. Trump always chickens out. And mindful of the reputation he has earned on Wall Street for chickening out on his own threats, including his threat to commit a war crime of bombing of Iran 2 days ago, which he retreated from today, bombing civilian targets, when Donald Trump was describing his imagined negotiations with Iran to reporters this morning, he said, quote, they called, I didn't call, they called, end quote. Such is the goofy insecurity of the man who knows he stands accused of always chickening out. They called, I didn't call, they called. His exact words. Before he became Donald Trump's pet, Senator Lindsey Graham had this thought about the person Mitch McConnell called this despicable human being.
And you know how you make America great again? Tell Donald Trump to go to hell.
Leading off our coverage tonight is Congressman Adam Smith of Washington State. He is the top Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman, thank you very much for joining us tonight. What is your understanding, if we can have one, of the state of Donald Trump's war tonight? Oh, we don't have.
Sorry, I was muted there. My apologies. Okay. No, look, he doesn't have a particular vision. I mean, his goal, his idea when he started was that he was basically going to do what he does in every aspect of his life. He was going to use coercion, violence, and action against people to force them to capitulate. So I think he imagined that at some point Iran would capitulate in the way that apparently Venezuela has. And Iran was never going to do that. Iran is an entirely different situation than Venezuela. So that was his goal. And now, as we're in the fourth week of the war, it's very clear that simply bombing them, however effectively, and I take the military at its word that they've been very effective in terms of knocking out Iranian targets, they can't knock out enough Iranian targets to get this Iranian regime to capitulate. So what now? I don't think Trump honestly knows. So he's making a bunch of threats in a bunch of different directions. People like Lindsey Graham are imagining that somehow we can send in 5,000 Marines and fundamentally change the situation. We can't, by the way. All that would do would be to escalate it and drive up the cost. So Trump's stuck, and I don't think he knows where to go, which is why I'm urging him to stop the war, at least stop the cost and the loss of life, and come up with a better plan. But he doesn't know where he's going right now.
Well, he promised to be bombing civilian infrastructure sites as of this hour tonight. Over 48 hours ago, he stepped back from that threat this morning as he saw what was going to happen on the stock market if he didn't retract that threat. Extended it for 5 days, which gives him 5 days of stock trading, I guess, in his mind. But as we go forward, what would be the negotiating objective of the war that Donald Trump has declared here?
Yeah, well, it's a key policy challenge. I mean, first of all, if he's looking at options to escalate, to try to finally get Iran to capitulate, he doesn't have good options. I mean, we don't have enough troops, even if we tried to take over Iran, and sending in a few isn't going to change the situation. But that's what he's looking at. Is, might sending in some troops, might seizing Karg Island or doing something else with the Marines have an appreciable difference. I don't think it will. The other thing he can do, of course, is ramp up the attacks to target infrastructure, which you're not supposed to do in a war. And also, it would undermine one of the central goals here, and that is to show the Iranian people that we're not against them, we're against the regime. Well, if you start bombing all of their fuel sources, you push them to the position of starvation and blackouts and deprivation, well, then you are making war on the Iranian people, which is counterproductive. So I don't think he knows how to escalate to get Iran to a different position. And then I can't put it any better than you put it a moment ago in terms of what he could hope to get from a negotiation. Nothing better than what Barack Obama got that Donald Trump stupidly tore up in his first term.
His idea that, as he put it, me and the Ayatollah, that's who's going to control the Strait of Hormuz in his imagined negotiations today. And he threatened the massive, war crime bombing that would occur tonight if the Strait of Hormuz was not open tonight. It's not open. He failed to go through with that threat. So hasn't he shown the Iranians that his threats can be ignored?
Oh, absolutely. And he's also shown, with now going on almost 4 weeks of war, that Iran can take our best punch. I mean, it hurts. Certainly, it has weakened them, but it's not going to topple the regime. So now what? I mean, if you walk into a room and the only play you got with the guy you're dealing with basically is to punch him in the face, and you do so, and he just keeps smiling back at you, then what? And that's where we're at right now. And I really want to emphasize for all this talk that as long as this war goes on, the costs continue to go up, more lives are at risk, more civilians will die, more U.S. service members are at risk. And for what? What more is he going to achieve by continuing this war at this point? And that's the pressure we need to put on the Trump administration, but the Republicans in Congress as well. How can you justify continuing the bloodshed and continuing the disruption when you don't have a path towards achieving any kind of goal or policy objective that would make it even close to worth continuing that war?
Congressman Adam Smith, thank you very much for starting off our coverage tonight.
Thanks, Lawrence.
And coming up, so did Donald Trump solve his economic crisis by delaying his threats against Iran this morning? Donald Trump seems to be betting that voters will forget the economic pain Donald Trump's war has already caused them. By the time they go to the polls in November, our next guest says, no, they won't. That's next. Iran's civilian infrastructure, including power plants, if Iran didn't reopen the Strait of Hormuz by 7:44 p.m. tonight. Donald Trump retreated this morning by announcing he was delaying his threat by at least 5 days, which would give the stock market, in his mind, 5 days of trading to recover from the losses inflicted by Donald Trump's deranged, retracted threat. This morning, with the stock market poised to crash and oil prices skyrocketing, Donald Trump announced his retreat, and he decided to delay his threat. Speaking at Australia's National Press Club today, the head of the International Energy Agency said that Trump's war in Iran had caused the global oil supply to drop by 11 million barrels a day, saying the situation is, quote, very severe. And joining us now is Amos Hochstein, former White House senior advisor for energy and the Middle East in the Biden administration. Amos, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And faithful viewers of this program will note that last week when you were on with Jen Psaki and you had to be cut off toward the end of the program when they ran out of time, I was eager to hear much more, and so here we are. So please pick up exactly where you left off with the incorporation of Donald Trump's threat over the weekend, which is now retracted, and Donald Trump is probably thinking he has solved his economic problems by retracting that threat.
Look, I think that there is throughout this war, once the Iranians made clear that they have the leverage of the Straits, and with it, the energy crisis, and as I had said to Jen Psaki last week, this is not an oil crisis. This is the worst energy crisis we have ever seen. We have something in the 9 to 10 million barrels of oil that are off the market every day, out of about 105 million barrels that the world needs. But what we don't talk about as much when we focus on oil is that it's also diesel for all our trucks around the world, that it is jet fuel, and airlines are going to start cutting back flights and passing on to consumers, to passengers, to all of us, the cost of fuel surcharges. And that's coming. And it also means that there is fertilizers for farmers are not coming, helium gas for semiconductors, and more products, and of course LNG and natural gas. So there's so much that's being cut off from the world economy. And what Donald Trump has understood is that what he needs to do is to talk the market and lull the market into thinking this is almost over. So what he did today, which of course was a retreat from the 48-hour timeline, which didn't make sense to begin with and would have probably caused a far greater escalation, because they basically say, you want to hit ours, we'll hit everybody else's. And then this gets worse. So not only did he delay by 5 days to give him a whole trading week, but he is following a pattern of saying over the last couple of weeks, every once in a while, the war is nearly complete. We have almost finished all our targets. We've done almost everything we need every few days. And the market, I don't know what the market knows or doesn't, but it chooses to believe that. And that's what sustains the war, actually.
We don't get similar statements out of the Iranian regime, at least not that we're picking up here. We don't hear them telling their population, it's going to be over soon, it's going to be over soon.
Well, I think that there is always a problem with who's playing defense and offense. There's a lot more responsibility on the offense side. You have to take something. The other side, to win, just has to survive, to absorb. This is a country that has, look, again, I don't like what Donald Trump's doing, but let's not forget, Iran is an evil regime that has killed many, many Americans and many Muslims around the world, especially the region. But they fought a war with Iraq. They have been under sanctions. They know how to handle this, and they sure are handling it. Once the first week of shock and awe was over and they survived and the regime survived, the idea that they will collapse is very, very unlikely. And so the results of this war now are a president that needs to decide, do I cut my losses now and do some kind of deal, even if it's not great, and I declare victory, but at least I cut my losses? Or do I double down? And you and I both know there are presidents in history Vietnam's a good example where you double down. It rarely leads to something good. And so this economic crisis, to me, this energy crisis, every week that goes by that we're still at war means that it's significantly longer of a tail of when it gets normalized again for consumers.
What is that length of time now?
Look, in January, when the talk of war was starting, right after the famous tweet, "Help is on the way," oil prices were at 60. Gasoline for Americans was about $2.80 on average. Today, oil is near 100, and gasoline is probably tomorrow will be at $4. And diesel is over $5. Remember, diesel is so critical to our food prices and everything else that comes in an Amazon truck to our house. And so as we go along, if this goes further, then by the end of the year, we're still going to be at around $80, $75 or $80, even if the war ends in April. That means it will be $20, $30 above where we would have been. And remember, President Trump talked about oil and gasoline prices a lot in the State of the Union. And so he thinks it's very important. And now everybody's telling us it's not important and just take a little bit of pain. But for a lot of families, it's not that the gasoline alone, it's gasoline's going to cost more, food's going to cost more, and all the products that they buy are going to cost more. Plus, electricity prices were rising before the war. So all of these put together are going to be noticeable for every American family that is trying to balance their budget.
What do you make of Donald Trump's formulation about, in the end, who's going to control the Strait of Hormuz? Today, he said, literally, me and the Ayatollah.
To some degree, the Ayatollah is probably saying, hey, at least he thinks I'm going to survive. Regime change is over, so at least I'm going to be there. Donald Trump is now acknowledging the regime that was supposed to be changed is now being recognized, both in the fact that he's going to have a joint venture with him and the fact that potentially they're going to be meeting with this very same Iranian regime at the end of this week, potentially, I say, because the Iranians have not confirmed it. They've just confirmed that the Americans have asked for it. But that is confirmation that we believe the regime is still there and likely to survive. So regime change is now off the table. And so I think the Straits, look, the Straits are a real problem because what the Iranians have done by exercising this threat means that in the future, all the countries of the region and the world are going to face a real problem. And when this war is over, we are going to have a real look into, regardless of what we think about the war, investing, governments of the world coming together, investing in alternative routes. We can't let any one country have a choke point like this. But that's for the future. And it won't be controlled by Donald Trump and the Ayatollah. But it may be controlled by Iran, and we have to fix that. But for now, they do control it. It's not closed. They're charging money in crypto from certain shippers that want to go through. But anybody else to go through right now has to wait until the Iranians say so. So we can say, look, it's not closed, but de facto, for all intents and purposes, the Iranians control what goes through, and right now they've decided that nothing should go through. And so that is what's going to put the pressure on our economy.
Amos Hochstein, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
It's a pleasure.
And coming up, Donald Trump is sending his unaccountable invasion forces to airports now for no reason, where they do absolutely nothing all day, which is an improvement in the daily work of ICE in this country. That's next. CNN's media reporter Brian Stelter reports that after a caller to a right-wing radio show suggested sending ICE agents to airports to help the TSA, the idea appears to have reached Donald Trump when one of the hosts of that radio show went on the Fox propaganda channel and, in effect, told Donald Trump about it directly. Donald Trump is now claiming it was all his idea.
ICE was my idea. I called, first person I called was Tom Homan. I said, what do you think? He said, I think it's great. Then I saw today there was some masks on. I didn't think the masks were appropriate. I put out a statement and I asked them, would it be possible to take off the mask?
Republicans in the United States Senate have voted over 10 times against funding the TSA and eliminating the long lines at airports. Republicans have refused to fund the TSA because Donald Trump tells them to refuse to fund it. Donald Trump has told Republican senators they should not vote for any funding of the TSA that does not include funding for ICE. Sending ICE agents to airports is a meaningless stunt, of course. No more than 150 ICE agents were deployed across several huge airports in the United States on Monday, and they were assigned to do absolutely nothing, except literally show their faces for the first time. The good news is that ICE agents apparently did not kill anyone at our airports today or anywhere else in the country. The New York Times reports the union representing TSA officers denounced the deployment of ICE to airports as disruptive, unsafe, and unhelpful. Joining us now is Democratic Congressman James Walkinshaw of Virginia. He is a member of the House Homeland Security Committee. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. And there's a report in the Senate that they negotiated, Democrats and Republicans, a package that would fund everything in your jurisdiction of Homeland Security except ICE, which is to say would fund TSA, and Donald Trump killed it.
Yeah, that's right, Lawrence. Look, Donald Trump has done this before when there's a possibility of a deal to make some progress. He says no deal. In fact, he said quite explicitly, we're not making any deals with the Democrats. So that's where we are. He's using ICE as a political tool once again in our airports. They're wandering around with nothing to do. I think it is interesting, President Trump realized ICE agents don't need masks in airports. If they don't need masks in airports, I don't understand why they need masks when they're wandering around communities across the country. We now know they don't need the masks. That's good news.
Yeah, the whole theory of the mask was it's so dangerous to be a TSA agent in America because Americans will, get pictures of you and then they will track you down somehow. Let's listen to Republican Senator John Kennedy explaining that Donald Trump personally killed the funding deal for TSA that Democrats and Republicans in the Senate agreed to. Let's listen to that.
Senator Cruz and I came up with a plan. Senator Thune submitted that to President Trump, as is his right. He said no deals with the Democrats. So we're back to square one.
That's the kind of thing that Republican senators don't normally reveal unless they are feeling tremendous heat themselves about what's happening in these airports.
Yeah, that's right. And look, think about what Americans are facing as we head into spring break. And, spring break for schools here in Virginia starts next week. If you're an American who's thinking about taking that road trip for spring break, maybe go to the beach or visit family, you're staring down the face of $4 a gallon gas prices. If you're thinking about flying, you're looking at 4-hour waits at TSA with these ICE agents wandering around the airport intimidating people. Maybe those things are too expensive for you. You want to stay home and just have a cookout, grill some burgers, and enjoy a beer. Well, those burgers and that beer is going to be a heck of a lot more expensive because of Donald Trump's tariffs. So all around, this is a punishing spring break for the American people, all thanks to Donald Trump and Republicans in Washington. That is the situation Americans are in right now.
Congressman James Walkinshaw, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Coming up, Donald Trump is very, very afraid of Roy Cooper winning the North Carolina Senate race in November. Roy Cooper joins us next.